Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 12. Nicta passed out on the bed ride back to Fort Salem. Whether it was from the pain or blood loss, Tally wasn't sure. But one moment Nicta was staring out the window, and the next she slumped over, almost hitting the floor with her head. They had all lunged forward to catch her, Raelle sliding down to sit on the floor and cradle Nicta's head in her lap in a weirdly intimate position. She tried and tried desperately to heal her, but the destruction of the witch plague had taken too much out of her. She had no energy left. Tally tried not to look at the blood that was all over Nicta's pants. She wasn't wearing her own face, but even the stolen one looked pale and ashen. It was a stranger's face, but she found herself staring at it, taking comfort in it, because the fact that the working was still holding on meant only one thing: Nicta was still alive. It was early evening by the time they reached Fort Salem, the setting sun casting hues of orange and pink throughout the sky, the shorter days making it seem like it was later than it actually was. The bat sat down, and the doors were opened the moment the propeller stopped whirring. Petra almost cried with relief when Abigail immediately flung herself into her mother's arms, and when Tally did the same, desperate for a mother's touch. Petra held them both, squeezing them tight. "I'm so glad you're both okay." Her eyes opened then, and she immediately stiffened at the sight of Raelle, still sitting on the floor of the bat, cradling a stranger's head in her arms. "Goddess, is that—" "I tried to heal her," Raelle began to shake. "I tried so hard, but I didn't have anything left in me. I couldn't do it." "I need a fixer, now," Petra ordered to someone in far speech, before letting Tally and Abigail go, climbing up into the bed to sit next to Raelle. "I tried so hard, I'm sorry." Raelle began to cry, as Petra pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Petra said firmly. "I got the reports. You did good, okay? I am so proud of you." She turned her head back to look at Tally and Abigail. "Of all of you. I know this couldn't have been easy." "She risked her life for me, Mom," Abigail said suddenly. The fixers rushed by now, pushing past both Abigail and Tally, pulling Nicta's barely breathing form out of the bat. "That knife was meant for me, and she threw herself in front of it. She didn't even hesitate." Petra's eyes flitted from Abigail down to Nicta, back up to Abigail. She sighed and climbed out of the bat, helping Raelle down as she did. "You three girls need to go get checked over in the infirmary." Abigail immediately began to protest, but was silenced by a withering look from Petra. "Your sister almost blew out her voice," Petra said, with a pointed look to the shivering girl next to her. "And it was not a request." Abigail glanced at Raelle sympathetically. "Right, Sorry. Come on, Ray. She reached out and took her sister's hand, Raelle allowing herself to be tugged along. Tally smiled at Petra one last time and made to start after her sisters, but the sight of Anacostia approaching her made her stop dead in her tracks. Craven, the woman said as she got closer. Much to Tally's surprise, Anacostia leaned in and roughly pulled her into a hug as Petra passed them both, presumably heading back to her duties. I went to see Sarah last night, Anacostia whispered into Tally's ear. I told her about the mission. Tally almost sagged with relief in Anacostia's arms, but she was pushed away. Anacostia rested her hands on Tally's shoulders, looking at her somberly. To say she did not take it well would be an understatement. Tally immediately tensed. What? What does that mean? Was she mad? Craven, no, Anacostia sighed. I mean, yes, but not at you. She was mad at Petra for sending you on a mission with... Anacostia glanced around, lowering her voice. With Nicta. She was terrified something was going to happen to you. I had to stop her from coming after you. Tally stared at Anacostia in shock. She tried to come after me? She thought of Sarah, alone in the safe house, scared and helpless to do anything to help Tally, and her heart started racing. I have to go see her. You need to get checked over first, Anacostia said firmly. She knows you were on your way back, and that you were unharmed. I told her the minute that I got the report. Tally felt a rush of gratitude towards Anacostia, and she had to resist the urge to hug the woman again. Oh, Goddess, thank you so much. Anacostia nodded, dropping her hands from Tally's shoulders. I would still go to her whenever you were able. Tally nodded quickly, wide-eyed, and she pulled away from Anacostia without saying anything. She gave Anacostia what she hoped was a grateful smile, heart thudding in her chest too much to be able to speak properly, and then she tore off, sprinting towards the infirmary. Even though she couldn't have been in the infirmary for more than 20 minutes, the fixers there checking her for signs of concussions, checking her reflexes, and goddess knows what else, it felt like an eternity to Tally. The moment she was cleared, she barely managed to breathe out a goodbye to Abigail and Raelle, and tore across the campus as fast as she could. Even though her entire body was vibrating with excitement and nerves at seeing Sarah again, her first stop was her dorm. She rushed through the fastest shower she had ever taken in her life, and quickly got dressed, racing across the dark bays with her still wet hair. Her voice shook as she sang the seed to reveal the door, and her hands were trembling so much that she couldn't properly trace the sigil the first time she tried. She cursed, willing her hands to stop shaking, and went to try again, but the door was ripped open anyway. Tally barely had time to react before she was pulled into Sarah's arms, the other woman wrapping her arms so tightly around Tally that she was lifted off her feet. Tally sucked in a breath, clutching desperately at Sarah, and without even thinking about what she was doing, she lifted her legs to wrap them around Sarah's waist. She was still shaking, even in Sarah's arms, and she felt Sarah take a step back and heard the door close a second later. Tally was pressed against a wall, Sarah's arms moving underneath Tally's thighs to support her better as Sarah leaned into Tally, pressing her face into Tally's neck. She felt Sarah take a shaky breath against her neck, and her own grip on Sarah tightened as she closed her eyes, feeling hot tears spring to them. Neither woman said anything for a while, until Tally felt Sarah press a gentle, shaky kiss to her collarbone, before lifting her head. Tally's eyes fluttered open to find Sarah looking at her, her heart skipping a beat as her eyes met Sarah's electric blues once. There was a fluttering in her stomach, and she felt Sarah's grip tighten on her thighs as their gaze met. "Hi," Tally whispered. Sarah let out something between a laugh and a sob, both a smile and tears springing to her face. "Hi," she whispered back. Her smile disappeared then, a more serious look coming to rest on her face. "I am so glad you came back safe." Tally swallowed. "Me too." "And you weren't hurt at all?" Sarah's eyes were searching her face with worry. "No," Tally said quickly, her hand reaching up to cup Sarah's face. "No, I didn't get hurt at all." Sarah nodded, turning her head in Tally's hand to press a kiss into her palm. "Good." Then, without warning, she leaned in, kissing Tally fiercely. Tally immediately responded, pushing forward into Sarah to kiss her with everything that she had. Sarah was all lips and teeth and tongue, arms still firmly holding Tally in place, as she would nip at Tally's lower lip, press a kiss to her jaw, and then return again to kiss Tally's lips, sliding her tongue into Tally's mouth, Tally groaning at the feeling. The kiss was desperate and messy, almost as if Sarah were trying to convince herself that Tally was actually there in her arms, safe and unharmed. Tally felt a tugging in her chest, a sudden want, no, a need, to feel all of Sarah against her, a need to be taken apart and be utterly consumed by her until there was nothing left except Sarah. Heat spread from Tally's stomach to her toes, and her fingers curled into Sarah's shoulders as she pulled back slightly with a gasp. "Sarah?" Sarah lifted her head to properly look Tally in the eyes again. "What is it, darling?" Her voice was low and heated, matching the look in her eye. "Will you take me to bed?" Abigail and Riel, as it turned out, were right. Desperate, "Oh, thank God you're alive, sex," was definitely a thing. The thought had briefly crossed Tally's mind, but it had gotten lost somewhere between one of Sarah's searing kisses and Sarah taking her shirt off. Tally forgot how to breathe as she gazed up at the shirtless Sarah from where she was laying back on the bed, Sarah straddling her hips. She took in the muscled arms, the toned stomach, the soft swelling of the breasts that were still hidden by the satin black bra that Sarah wore. Tally wasn't sure where she had gotten it, but it definitely wasn't army-issued. Sarah sat forward slightly, fingers reaching to hook under the hem of Tally's t-shirt, a questioning look on her eye. "May I?" Tally just nodded wordlessly, sitting up slightly so Sarah could gently slide her shirt up and over her head. Sarah's eyes never left Tally's as she flung the shirt over her shoulder, a hand gently pressing Tally back down into the bed. Tally could almost feel Sarah's eyes on her as they traveled down her body, and Tally wished she'd had the good sense to wear something other than the nondescript and very plain bra that she had been issued when she first arrived at Fort Salem. Sarah splayed one of her hands on Tally's stomach, leaning down and propping herself up with the other hand as she hovered over Tally. "I never knew those military-issued bras could look so good," she whispered before leaning further down, kissing Tally's sternum. Tally flushed at her words, feeling her chest and face heat up. She brought her hand up to thread through Sarah's silky hair, and as she felt Sarah press a kiss to her breast through her bra, she sucked in a breath. She tugged ever so slightly on Sarah's hair. "Wait." Sarah immediately pulled back. "Do you want to stop?" "No, goddess, no," Tally breathed out. "I want this. I do." She could feel her already red face grow warmer, and Sarah was looking at her with an adorably confused and concerned look on her face. "It's just that, well, I never... Is this your first time?" There was no judgment in Sarah's voice or her eyes, her head tilting as she looked down at Telly. "No," Telly corrected her, "but I've only ever been with one other person. At Beltane." It was becoming harder to hold Sarah's gaze. Sarah nodded, understanding. "And I've never been with a woman." She was fairly certain her face was on fire now, and she looked away as she spoke, focusing on a dark corner of Sarah's bedroom. "Look at me, love." Sarah's voice was gentle, and Telly immediately obeyed, eyes going back to Sarah, who was looking at her with an impossibly soft expression on her face. "That doesn't matter to me." "But what if I don't know what to do?" Telly was embarrassed, but she couldn't help as the words came out anyway. Sarah smiled at that, leaning in to press a sweet kiss to Telly's lips. "Then I will teach you." She dragged her hand up Telly's exposed stomach and ribs, agonizingly slow, feeling the younger woman shudder underneath her. Telly suddenly put both of her hands on Sarah's shoulders and pushed her away, up into a sitting position. She boldly sat up as well, following Sarah, who was looking at her, confused. Telly's hands dropped to the button on Sarah's jeans, shyness suddenly taking her over again. "Can we take these off?" Her face was flushed, but she was holding Sarah's gaze with an intensity that Sarah hadn't seen before. Yes, Sarah was surprised she was even able to speak. Her mouth was suddenly so dry. She sat still, watching Telly's face as she slowly popped the button on Sarah's jeans and slid the zipper down. Sarah sat up on her knees as Telly slowly slid the jeans down her legs, and then, when they caught around Sarah's knees, Sarah pushed Telly back down onto the bed and followed her down, kicking her jeans off the rest of the way as she did so. She went to kiss Telly again, but Telly shook her head from on the pillow. "Mine too." Sarah obliged, sitting back up, and much faster than Telly had, unfastened her pants, sliding them down her legs. Much like she had with Telly's shirt, she threw them onto the floor, not caring where they landed. They slowly removed the rest of each other's clothing, and soon enough Telly was bare underneath her, and shuddering under her touch. Sarah relished in every new strip of skin that was exposed to her, from Telly's breasts to her stomach to her thighs. Sarah would run her hands over it, scraping her nails gently into Telly's skin. She was absolutely certain that she was leaving even more marks on Telly this time around, but seeing as how most of them would be where no one else would going to ever see, she couldn't bring herself to care. Telly writhed and moaned under Sarah's touch. Sarah's lips, as Sarah slowly kissed her way down Telly's body, spending several minutes worshipping Telly's breasts, nipping and sucking as Telly clutched desperately at her back, nails scraping down it. She would certainly have some marks of her own as well. Sarah slid down Telly's body, gently nudging her thighs apart so she could settle between them. She pressed a soft kiss to the inside of Telly's thigh, and then the other. She could both see and smell Telly's arousal, and it was making her head swim. She was desperate to find out if she tasted as good as she had been imagining. She dug her nails into the soft flesh of Telly's thigh that she had just kissed. She heard Telly gasp, and one of her hands reached out to grab Sarah. "Sarah?" Her voice sounded too shaky for Sarah's liking, and she was up at Telly's side in an instant. "What's wrong? Did I hurt you?" Telly quickly shook her head, and she reached up for Sarah. I want you up here." Sarah looked at her questioningly. "With me, I mean." Telly struggled to find the words for what she meant. Please." Sarah's eyes lit up in recognition as she seemed to realize what Telly was saying. "Of course, love. Whatever you want." she answered softly. That seemed to ease Tally, and she took a steadying breath as Sarah positioned herself so she was on top of Tally, leaning on her left arm so none of her weight was actually on the younger woman. She took her free hand and slowly traced it up the inside of Tally's thigh. Tally let out a stuttering moan as Sarah's fingers brushed softly and then again more firmly over Tally's clit, moving slowly at first so she could get used to the pressure. Tally's soft moans and gasps spurred Sarah on, and she leaned down, nipping and sucking at Tally's collarbone as her fingers started to move faster, Tally growing louder. Sarah worked her up until she could tell Tally was getting close, her breathing growing more erratic, and she slowly slid her fingers down and into Tally, groaning at the slick wetness and heat that she felt. "Oh, that's so good, Tally," she breathed out as she began to move in and out of Tally, slowly at first. "You feel so good." Tally moaned loudly at Sarah's words, and she brought up a hand to tangle in Sarah's hair, the other clutching at the sheets of the bed. Sarah continued her movements as she began to work Tally up again, each gasp and moan that left Tally's mouth only making Sarah fuck her harder, faster, and fueling her own arousal that she could feel building between her legs. "You're doing so good," Sarah rasped out. "So good." Tally's eyes were screwed shut in pleasure, and she arched her body up into Sarah's at her praise. "Sarah, Goddess, she stuttered out, unable to form a proper sentence. Sarah didn't need Tally to be able to tell her that she was close. She could feel it in the way that Tally shuddered, the way her breathing was becoming much faster. And she let go of the sheets to clutch at Sarah's back with both of her hands. Sarah moved her thumb to press into Tally's clit, moving in sharp, short circles at the same time that she leaned down and bit Tally's shoulder. She felt Tally clench around her fingers, and Sarah's name left her lips with a final cry as she tumbled over the edge. Sarah moved up to kiss Tally on the lips as she slowed her movements, still working Tally through the aftershocks of her orgasm. "Perfect," she whispered, pulling back to whisper against Tally's shoulder, kissing it. "So perfect." She slowly slid out of Tally, bracing herself on both of her hands now to kiss Tally's sternum again. "I love you." Tally's hands stilled on Sarah's back, her eyes fluttering open. "You do?" she gasped out, certain she had misheard. Sarah pulled back to look at Tally. "What?" Tally swallowed nervously, her hand tightening on Sarah's shoulder. "What you just said. Do you mean that?" Sarah blinked once, twice. A look of realization slowly crossed her face as it dawned on her, once again, she had confessed her love for Tally without even realizing that she had done so. She took a sharp breath, ignoring the nerves that settled into her stomach as Tally glared up at her with her big brown eyes, watching. "Yes, I do." It was Tally's turn to inhale sharply, hardly able to believe her ears. She reached up to cup Sarah's cheek with a trembling hand. "I love you too." Sarah turned her head to kiss Tally's palm. Tally felt a wetness on her hand as she did so, and realized with a jolt that Sarah was crying. "Hey!" The thumb stroked Sarah's cheek as Sarah turned back to look at her, and she wiped away a stray tear. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. Sarah let out a short gasp of laughter, shaking her head. "Oh, darling, nothing is wrong." She moved off of Tally and onto the bed, laying on her side so she could still look at Tally. Tally rolled over to face her, mirroring Sarah's position. Sarah's hand stroked up and down Telly's side, leaving goosebumps in its wake. They stared at each other for a few moments, until Telly hesitantly reached forward. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," Sarah breathed out, "in a bit. I just want to stay like this for a moment more." Telly felt her chest swell with happiness, and she nodded, unable to believe just how incredibly lucky she felt in this moment. Sarah was staring at her like she was the most beautiful thing in the world, and Telly once again felt a tugging in her chest. She didn't know what it was, but it made her smile, and she reached out for Sarah's hand, tangling their fingers together. Sarah smiled and lifted up their joined hands to kiss Telly's knuckles. "I love you," Telly said again, unable to help herself. Sarah smiled, a brilliant smile that caused Telly's heart to ache, and she felt the strange tugging feeling in her chest intensify. "I love you too, darling."
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.